Before we begin, understand something that most people only realize after life has already forced the lesson upon them. Being unshakable does not mean becoming invulnerable. It does not mean reaching a state where nothing hurts you, nothing surprises you, nothing disappoints you, nothing breaks your heart, nothing keeps you awake at 3 a.m, staring into the darkness, asking questions that have no immediate answers. The fantasy of invulnerability is one of the most destructive fantasies ever sold to human beings, because it convinces people that strength means the absence of struggle, when in reality strength is what remains when struggle has stripped away everything that was never strength in the first place. There comes a moment in nearly every life when reality stops negotiating. A moment when the plans fail, when the relationship ends, when the betrayal arrives, when the opportunity disappears, when the diagnosis comes, when the person you trusted becomes the source of the wound, when the future you spent years building collapses faster than you can comprehend. And in that moment, something terrifying happens. You discover that there is a version of yourself that only exists when everything is going wrong. A version of yourself that does not appear when life is comfortable, predictable, and cooperative. A version that emerges only under pressure. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding that version. They spend years constructing identities designed to prevent discomfort. They build routines to avoid uncertainty. They organize their decisions around safety. They seek relationships that protect them from loneliness, careers that protect them from insecurity, habits that protect them from confronting themselves. And then life does what life has always done. It removes the protection, not because life is cruel, not because the universe is targeting you, but because every human being eventually reaches the point where the structures that once carried them can no longer carry them any further. And when that happens, you are left standing face to face with a question that determines the quality of the rest of your life. What remains when everything you depended on is gone? Most people answer that question unconsciously. They panic, they react, they collapse into bitterness. They spend years replaying the injustice, obsessing over what should have happened, fighting reality rather than learning from it. They become emotionally hostage to events they cannot change. But a small number of people do something different. They discover that there is a deeper center inside them than the circumstances surrounding them. They discover that there is a part of themselves that can observe the storm without becoming the storm. They discover that resilience is not a personality trait, but a psychological architecture that can be built. And once that architecture begins forming, something extraordinary happens. Life continues to challenge them. Loss still arrives. Failure still appears. Uncertainty still exists. But those experiences stop defining them because they no longer mistake external instability for internal collapse. They learn the difference between pain and destruction. They learn the difference between adversity and identity. They learn that being unshakable is not about controlling what happens to you. It is about refusing to let what happens to you become the final authority over who you are. And today on Quiet Power, we are going deeper than motivation, deeper than positivity, deeper than the surface level advice that tells you to simply think differently when life becomes difficult. We are going into the actual psychology of remaining unshakable when life tries to break you. Why some people emerge from suffering stronger, while others remain trapped inside it for decades. What the strongest minds throughout history understood about hardship that most people never learn, and how to build the kind of psychological foundation that remains standing even when the rest of your world begins falling apart. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because this channel is building the most complete psychological map available for understanding resilience, emotional mastery, human behavior, and inner strength at the deepest level where these forces actually operate. And this video may become one of the most important pieces of that map, because sooner or later, every human being faces a season that tests them beyond what they believed they could endure. The people who emerge stronger are not the people who avoid those seasons. They are the people who understand what those seasons are trying to teach them. The first thing to understand about becoming unshakable is that life does not break people in the way most people imagine. It reveals them. This distinction changes everything because most people approach adversity as though the hardship itself is the source of their suffering when, in reality, hardship often functions more like a spotlight than a weapon. It illuminates structures that were already unstable. It exposes beliefs that were already fragile. It reveals dependencies that were already governing the person's emotional life long before the crisis arrived. Consider how often people say that a difficult experience changed them. A divorce changed them. A betrayal changed them. Financial collapse changed them. Failure changed them. But if you look closely, what these experiences often do is expose parts of the self that had never been examined under pressure before. The person who discovers they cannot tolerate rejection is not learning something new about rejection. They are learning something new about their relationship to validation. The person who collapses after losing status is not learning something new about status. They are learning something new about where they located their worth. The person who cannot survive uncertainty is not learning something new about uncertainty. They are learning something new about their dependence on certainty. This is why adversity feels so personal. It attacks the psychological structures we believed were permanent. It forces confrontation with realities we spent years avoiding. Carl Jung observed that people will do almost anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. What he understood was that most human suffering is intensified not by the event itself, but by the resistance to what the event is revealing. The unshakable person develops a radically different relationship with adversity. They stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this showing me about myself?" That shift sounds small. It is not. It transforms suffering from an enemy into information. Suddenly the crisis becomes a mirror. The failure becomes feedback. The disappointment becomes instruction. And while none of these experiences become pleasant, they become useful. This is precisely what separated the Stoic philosophers from the average person of their time. Marcus Aurelius did not believe hardship existed to destroy character. He believed hardship existed to reveal and strengthen it. Every obstacle became an opportunity to practice the virtues he wished to embody. Every frustration became training. Every loss became perspective. The event itself mattered less than the relationship he developed toward it. Most people spend their lives attempting to create circumstances that guarantee emotional stability. The unshakable person understands that circumstances are inherently unstable. Therefore, stability must come from somewhere deeper. It must come from identity. It must come from values. It must come from principles that remain intact regardless of outcomes. This is why life often feels most dangerous when your sense of self is attached to things outside your control. If your worth depends on success, failure threatens your identity. If your worth depends on approval, criticism threatens your identity. If your worth depends on certainty, uncertainty threatens your identity. And because life guarantees failure, criticism, and uncertainty at various points, the externally constructed identity is perpetually vulnerable. The unshakable person gradually relocates their center of gravity inward. They stop building identity around outcomes and start building it around character, around who they are becoming rather than what they are achieving, around the values they can control rather than the results they cannot. And this creates a psychological stability that external events struggle to destroy because it is no longer housed in external conditions. The storm can remove the outcome. It cannot remove the character. The crisis can destroy the plan. It cannot destroy the principle. The loss can change the circumstance. It cannot change the person who has learned how to stand independent of circumstance. This is the first lesson life teaches every truly resilient human being. The goal is not to build a life where nothing can go wrong. The goal is to build a self that remains intact when things do. And once that lesson begins integrating, the entire relationship with adversity changes. The person stops seeing themselves as fragile. They stop seeing hardship as evidence that they are failing. They stop interpreting difficulty as proof that something has gone wrong. Instead, they begin recognizing adversity for what it often is, the training ground where the strongest version of themselves is slowly being constructed. The second thing to understand about remaining unshakable when life tries to break you is that most people are not destroyed by reality itself. They are destroyed by the story they tell themselves about reality. This distinction is so important that once you see it clearly, you begin noticing it everywhere. Two people experience the same setback. One emerges stronger. The other remains trapped for years. Two people endure rejection. One uses it as fuel for growth. The other allows it to become evidence of their inadequacy. Two people lose something they deeply wanted. One eventually transforms the loss into wisdom. The other transforms the loss into identity. The external event may be identical, but the psychological interpretation creates completely different lives. Viktor Frankl discovered this under conditions more extreme than most human beings will ever experience. Inside Nazi concentration camps, where every external freedom had been stripped away, he observed something extraordinary. Some people lost the ability to continue psychologically. Others somehow retained a sense of inner freedom, despite circumstances designed specifically to destroy it. Frankl concluded that the final human freedom is the ability to choose one's attitude toward circumstances, even when the circumstances themselves cannot be changed. Most people hear that idea and interpret it as optimism. It is not optimism. It is sovereignty. It is the realization that while life can influence your emotional state, it does not automatically own your interpretation of events unless you surrender that ownership. And this is where most people unknowingly give away their power. They confuse events with meanings. Something painful happens, and they immediately assume the first emotional interpretation that arrives is the truth. They fail, and the mind whispers, "You are not capable." Someone leaves, and the mind whispers, "You were not enough." A dream collapses, and the mind whispers, "Your future is gone." The problem is not that these thoughts appear. Every human mind generates catastrophic interpretations under stress. The problem is that most people never question them. They allow temporary emotional reactions to become permanent beliefs. They allow moments of pain to define entire identities. They mistake the voice of fear for the voice of reality. The unshakable person develops a different relationship with thought itself. They learn to observe thoughts without automatically obeying them. They recognize that the mind under pressure is not always a reliable narrator. They understand that emotions are information, not instructions. Fear informs you that something matters. It does not automatically mean danger is present. Sadness informs you that something has been lost. It does not automatically mean hope is gone. Anxiety informs you that uncertainty exists. It does not automatically mean catastrophe is coming. This ability to separate experience from interpretation becomes one of the most powerful psychological skills a human being can develop. Because once you realize that thoughts are events occurring within consciousness rather than commands that must be followed, you gain space. And in that space, freedom begins. Consider how many people spend years suffering from experiences that lasted only months because they continued, carrying the meaning long after the event had ended. The betrayal happened once. The story about the betrayal continued for 10 years. The rejection happened once. The interpretation of rejection became a permanent lens through which every future relationship was viewed. The failure happened once. The identity of failure became lifelong. The unshakable person refuses to make this mistake. They process pain honestly, but they do not build a home inside it. They grieve losses, but they do not worship them. They acknowledge suffering, but they do not organize their future around it. This is not denial. It is discipline. And discipline at the level of interpretation is often more important than discipline at the level of behavior. Because behavior follows belief. If you believe adversity is proof of your weakness, you will behave like someone who is weak. If you believe adversity is evidence of growth, you will behave like someone who is growing. The event remains identical. The interpretation changes everything. Nietzsche captured this principle when he wrote that he who has a why can bear almost any how. What he understood was that meaning transforms endurance. Human beings can survive astonishing levels of difficulty when they believe the difficulty serves a purpose. But when suffering appears meaningless, even relatively small challenges can feel unbearable. This is why remaining unshakable requires more than emotional toughness. It requires meaning. It requires a reason larger than comfort, a reason larger than convenience, a reason larger than immediate happiness. Because life inevitably presents periods where comfort disappears, convenience disappears, happiness disappears. And when those things vanish, the person whose life was built entirely around them collapses with them. The person whose life is anchored to meaning remains standing. They understand that hardship is temporary, but growth can be permanent. They understand that pain can become wisdom if it is processed correctly. They understand that difficulty is often the price paid for transformation. This realization changes the entire relationship with suffering. The question stops being, how do I avoid pain? And becomes, how do I use pain? The question stops being, why is this happening? And becomes, who am I becoming through this? The question stops being, how quickly can I escape discomfort? And becomes, what is this discomfort teaching me that comfort never could? Life has a strange habit of placing its most valuable lessons inside experiences nobody would voluntarily choose. Courage is learned through fear. Patience is learned through delay. Strength is learned through resistance. Wisdom is learned through mistakes. Resilience is learned through adversity. The qualities most admired in human beings are almost always forged under conditions those same human beings wished they could avoid while they were happening. The unshakable person eventually understands this paradox. They stop demanding that life become easier and start becoming more capable. They stop asking reality to remove every obstacle and start asking themselves how to grow large enough to move through them. And when that shift occurs, something remarkable happens. Life continues presenting challenges, but the challenges stop feeling like evidence of personal failure. They become invitations. Invitations to deepen. Invitations to strengthen. Invitations to discover capacities that comfort would never reveal. This is the psychology of endurance. Not pretending pain does not exist. Not becoming emotionally numb. Not forcing positivity, but developing the ability to stand inside difficulty without allowing difficulty to become your identity. Because life does not determine who you are. Life reveals who you are willing to become. And the people who remain unshakable are the people who learn how to transform every attempt by life to break them into another reason to rise. The third layer of becoming unshakable is the one most people resist for years because it requires surrendering something the ego desperately wants to keep, a belief that life should have happened differently. If you look closely at the deepest forms of suffering, you will often find the same hidden conflict underneath them. It is not merely pain. It is resistance to pain. It is the ongoing argument with reality itself. It is the exhausting psychological effort of insisting that what happened should not have happened, that what was lost should not have been lost, that the betrayal should not have occurred, that the opportunity should not have disappeared, that the future should have unfolded according to the plans you carefully constructed. And while this resistance feels understandable, it creates a second layer of suffering far heavier than the original wound. Because reality does not negotiate. It does not reverse itself because we disagree with it. It does not return lost years because we mourn them intensely. It does not erase difficult experiences because we believe we deserve something different. The event has already happened. The loss has already occurred. The chapter has already ended. Yet many people remain psychologically trapped for years because they continue fighting battles that no longer exist anywhere except inside their own minds. They are not wrestling with reality anymore. They are wrestling with memory. They are wrestling with expectation. They are wrestling with an imagined version of life that never came to pass. And this internal conflict consumes enormous energy. Energy that could be used for healing becomes trapped in resistance. Energy that could be used for growth becomes trapped in regret. Energy that could be used for building the future becomes trapped in attempting to rewrite the past. This is why acceptance is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Most people hear the word acceptance and assume it means surrender. They imagine it means giving up. They imagine it means approving of what happened or pretending the loss was fair. But genuine acceptance is none of those things. Acceptance is simply the decision to stop arguing with facts. It is the moment you recognize that reality does not become more bearable by denying it. It becomes more bearable by facing it completely. The strongest people are not the people who avoid painful truths. They are the people who develop the capacity to look directly at painful truths without collapsing beneath them. They can acknowledge what happened without becoming defined by it. They can acknowledge loss without becoming loss. They can acknowledge pain without turning pain into identity. This is why acceptance creates power. The moment you stop fighting reality, you recover all the energy that was previously being spent resisting it. Suddenly, your attention becomes available again. Your creativity becomes available again. Your future becomes available again. The event has not changed, but your relationship to it has changed completely. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that people are disturbed not by events, but by their judgments about events. What he understood was that suffering multiplies whenever we attach impossible demands to reality. We demand certainty from an uncertain world. We demand permanence from temporary experiences. We demand control over things that have never belonged to our control. And then we suffer when reality refuses to obey. The unshakable person gradually learns a different approach. They stop demanding guarantees. They stop demanding permanence. They stop demanding that life provide absolute security before they allow themselves to move forward. Instead, they build stability within themselves. They develop the ability to function amid uncertainty rather than waiting for uncertainty to disappear. Because uncertainty never disappears. Life remains unpredictable. Relationships remain vulnerable. Plans remain fragile. The future remains unwritten. The difference is that the resilient person no longer requires certainty in order to remain grounded. This is where true psychological strength begins emerging. Not when life becomes predictable, but when you become adaptable. Charles Darwin once observed that survival belongs not to the strongest or the most intelligent, but to those most responsive to change. The same principle applies psychologically. The people who remain unshakable are rarely the people who avoid change. They are the people who learn how to adapt without losing themselves. They learn how to let go without becoming empty. They learn how to begin again without becoming bitter. They learn how to rebuild without becoming cynical. Every difficult season asks the same question in a different form. Can you release what no longer exists and fully step into what remains? Most people hesitate. They cling to old identities, old expectations, old versions of themselves. They continue carrying emotional weight that no longer serves them because the familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. But eventually, life forces a choice. Either continue living inside what was or begin building what can be. The unshakable person chooses the second path, not because it is easy, not because they feel ready, but because they understand that growth requires movement, and movement requires release. You cannot carry every version of yourself into the future. Some identities must die. Some expectations must dissolve. Some dreams must end so larger ones can emerge. This process feels like loss while it is happening. Yet in hindsight, it often reveals itself as transformation. A relationship that ended made room for self-respect. The failure that devastated you developed capabilities success never would have taught. The uncertainty that terrified you forced the discovery of strengths you never knew existed. Looking backward, the event that appeared to be destruction was often construction in disguise. This is why the unshakable person eventually develops a profound trust in their own ability to endure. Not trust that nothing bad will happen. Not trust that life will always work out according to plan. But trust that whatever happens, they will find a way through it. This trust becomes one of the strongest psychological assets a human being can possess. Because fear loses much of its power when you stop doubting your ability to survive difficult experiences. The future no longer feels like a threat. It feels like terrain. Unknown terrain, perhaps. Challenging terrain, certainly. But terrain you are capable of navigating. And once you develop that trust, something remarkable happens. Life stops feeling like a constant test you might fail. It begins feeling like a process you are capable of meeting. The storms still arrive. The losses still occur. The uncertainty still exists. But you stop seeing yourself as fragile. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must be protected from difficulty at all costs. You recognize that the very experiences you once feared most have already proven something extraordinary. You survived them. And if you survived them, then perhaps you are far stronger than you have been giving yourself credit for all along. That realization changes everything. Because the moment you stop negotiating with reality and start trusting your ability to meet it, you become extraordinarily difficult for life to break. A final layer, the deepest layer, the one that determines whether everything we have discussed becomes temporary inspiration or permanent transformation, addresses a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding because it requires a complete reorganization of how they understand strength itself. The truth is this: life was never asking you to become stronger than adversity. Life was asking you to become larger than the version of yourself that adversity could destroy. Most people imagine resilience as a form of resistance. They imagine that the strongest person is the one who never bends, never doubts, never breaks emotionally, never struggles, never experiences fear. But if history teaches anything, it teaches the opposite. The strongest people are not the people who avoided being broken. They are the people who allowed life to break what needed to be broken while protecting what truly mattered. Because there are parts of every person that deserve to collapse. The false identities, the illusions of control, the dependence on external validation, the belief that worth comes from achievement, the belief that security comes from certainty, the belief that life owes fairness, the belief that suffering is evidence of failure. These structures feel like strength until life removes them. Then we discover they were never strength at all. They were scaffolding, temporary supports mistaken for foundations. And when the scaffolding falls, most people panic because they believe they are falling with it. But what if the collapse is not the end? What if the collapse is the beginning of discovering what was holding you up all along? Every major transformation begins with disillusionment. Every meaningful evolution begins with the death of an old certainty. The person you are meant to become is often hidden beneath the person you have been trying to remain. This is why the most profound periods of growth rarely feel empowering while they are happening. They feel confusing. They feel painful. They feel disorienting. They feel like losing yourself. Because in many ways, That is exactly what is happening. You are losing a version of yourself that can no longer carry you where life is trying to take you. And the tragedy is that many people spend years trying to reconstruct that old version. They attempt to become who they were before the heartbreak, before the failure, before the disappointment, before the loss. They spend enormous energy trying to return to a previous self. But the unshakable person understands something different. They understand that the goal is not to return. The goal is to evolve. The goal is not recovery of the old self. A goal is creation of a stronger one. Because every difficult season places a choice in front of you. You can become smaller because of what happened, or you can become deeper because of what happened. You can allow suffering to harden you into bitterness, or you can allow suffering to mature you into wisdom. You can allow loss to convince you that life is unsafe, or you can allow loss to teach you what truly matters. The event itself does not decide the outcome. Your relationship with the event decides the outcome. This is why some people emerge from adversity more compassionate, while others emerge more cynical. The same fire that hardens clay softens wax. The same experience that destroys one person transforms another. And the difference is not found in the hardship. The difference is found in the meaning that person creates from it. The psychologist Carl Rogers believed that the curious paradox is that when we accept ourselves exactly as we are, then we can change. The same principle applies to life itself. The moment you stop demanding that reality becomes something other than what it is, you gain the freedom to respond to it effectively. The moment you stop wishing for a different past, you gain access to a different future. The moment you stop measuring your worth by what happened to you, you begin discovering who you are independent of circumstance. This is the true foundation of being unshakable. Not confidence, not motivation, not positive thinking, identity. A self that exists beneath success and failure. A self that remains when approval disappears. A self that survives uncertainty. A self rooted so deeply in values, purpose, and character that external events lose the ability to dictate its existence. And once that identity begins forming, life changes in a way that is difficult to explain until it has been experienced. Challenges still come, but they no longer feel personal. Setbacks still happen, but they no longer feel final. Fear still appears, but it no longer feels authoritative. You stop interpreting every obstacle as evidence that you are on the wrong path. You stop viewing every difficulty as proof that something has gone wrong. Instead, you begin understanding what the strongest people throughout history eventually understood. Adversity is not the interruption of the journey. Adversity is the journey. The moments that test you are often the moments that define you. The seasons that break your expectations are often the seasons that reveal your capacity. The experiences you would never choose are often the experiences that introduce you to strengths you never knew existed. And perhaps this is the most important realization of all. You are not reading this because life has been easy. You are not here because the path has been smooth. You are here because somewhere along the way life challenged you. It disappointed you. It forced questions you did not want to ask and confrontations you did not want to have. Yet despite all of that, you are still here. You are still standing. You are still searching. You are still growing. Which means something extraordinary is already true about you. You have survived 100% of the days you believed might destroy you. You have endured losses you thought you could never endure. You have carried burdens you never imagined carrying. And every one of those experiences has been silently building evidence for a truth you may not fully believe yet. You are far more resilient than your fear would have you think. The storm was never the proof of your weakness. The fact that you are still standing after it is proof of your strength. Life may test you again. It almost certainly will. But when it does, remember this. Your power is not found in avoiding hardship. Your power is found in meeting hardship without surrendering yourself. Your strength is not measured by how little pain you experience. It is measured by how much truth, dignity, courage, and integrity you can carry through that pain. And the person who learns this becomes extraordinarily difficult for life to defeat, not because life stops challenging them, but because every challenge becomes another opportunity to become more fully who they were always capable of being. This is quiet power. If this video spoke to a part of you that has been carrying more than anyone realizes, if it gave language to a struggle you have lived through but never fully understood, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this channel is not about motivation that fades tomorrow. It is about building the kind of psychological strength that remains when motivation disappears, when circumstances change, and when life asks more of you than you believed you could give. Share this video with someone who is going through a difficult season right now. Someone who feels overwhelmed, exhausted, uncertain, or close to giving up. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can hear is not that life will get easier, but that they are stronger than they think. And leave your answer in the comments. What is the hardest challenge life has ever put in front of you? And what did it teach you about yourself that comfort never could? Read the answers of others as well. You may discover that the strength you admire in other people was built through struggles surprisingly similar to your own. Until the next one, stop measuring your life by the storms you face. Measure it by the person you become while walking through them. Stand firm when the ground feels uncertain. Trust the strength that hardship has been quietly building inside you. And remember, life does not test you to discover your limits. It tests you to reveal how much of your power you have not yet learned to trust.